Good afternoon, listeners. Good afternoon, citizens of the Republic of the Gambia. Good afternoon to our sisters and brothers in the sister Republic of Senegal, to the entire ECOWAS sub-region and the continent of Africa. This is your brother Essa C, back again on the airways with you on the Hello Gambia Radio to present our daily program. Our today's topic is France-Africa Summit, the position of France in the geopolitical arena as a strong member of the European Union and also as a permanent member of the Security Council versus its role and what is expected of it in the continent of Africa whilst facing challenges which are caused by internal factors, which include but not limited to the side effects or long-term effects being caused by pariah states, warlords, and then the threat caused by ethnic conflicts, and then not to forget about the what is caused by the areas of Africa which are definitely engulfed by sectarian violence, citing countries like the Central African Republic, Nigeria, and where we still have precipitants in areas like Mali, some of which have been contained but not completely eradicated. And then we will also not forget the role that is expected from heads of state within Africa itself that occupy or who occupy important positions as far as power play or as far as being shakers and movers within the African continent is concerned. We all know that this past week has been a busy one for the world at large and Africa, to be more specific. And we all know that it also coincided with the passing away of Nelson Madiba Mandela. In view of the subject matter on the program today, we'll reflect on the meaning of the summit in France, which is the Africa-France Summit. This summit is meant to focus on security and economic issues and will be followed by discussions. Of course, that Saturday has already passed, which is day before yesterday, on the crisis in the Central African Republic. We already know that France has deployed 1,200 troops to its former colony to back up a larger African force that will attempt to stabilize a country in danger of being engulfed by sectarian violence, as we mentioned earlier. I mean, it is indeed worrisome and a cause for concern. I mean, regardless of its colonial legacy in Africa, I mean, association, history, and of course the medium of communication, which is French, being used in Francophone Africa, which is also an important branch as far as the, I mean, world perception is concerned, by making reference to the very reason why we have a body like the Francophonie in existence. And also it comes back to reiterate the point that former colonial powers could be useful in changing the legacy that was left by those who occupied these colonized countries to something else that the modern generation will applaud, which is using association and of course historical ties to make sure that those they are associated with are not left behind. As far as building economies in Africa is concerned, as far as nourishing democracy is concerned, as far as the promotion of good governance is concerned, that indeed is the most essential part of the process as far as the meaning of a term like focusing on security and economic issues is to be put, if it's put into its proper perspective. So when one thinks about the challenges that are within Africa and then expands on this topic with views and perceptions that could be shared within and outside Africa with concerned parties, I mean, sometimes one can say that it leaves much to be desired, but at the same time, we can entertain the feeling that could be a product of the audacity of hope. So this is somehow or somewhat a shared responsibility between those leading governments in Africa and the people itself. I mean, when one reflects on the past of those who colonize most parts in Africa by, I mean, making reference to specific countries like United Kingdom, France and Belgium, we can still find an answer in history. The answer is this, that power belongs to the people. I mean, we all know what we have been taught in school as far as assimilation, which is associated with French colonization, and also the indirect rule, which is associated with the, I mean, British rule. I mean, we know that most of the time the methods of approach that were used by those powers who were in Africa colonizing our countries was more or less designed to create a mechanism that can control the psyche of society for nothing other than exploitation, man by man. But that is the past. What does the present show us? The present shows us that these methods of approach were a mistake. They were a mistake for the ones who came to colonize Africa and exploit it. And also they were a mistake for those who were within Africa helping the colonialists control their own people, either by encouraging the method of assimilation or indirect rule. Therefore, both sides, I can say, have found answers during the course of time. Whether those answers are applicable in every situation or not, we all know deep inside, we are conscious of the fact that there is no way that Africa can be salvaged without the promotion of democracy, good governance. I mean, this is the best way forward. Now, one will tie the latter with the expectations we have as far as the role of France is concerned in Africa, because it is the most recent and the most active, I mean, as we speak. We all remember when the ACME rebels invaded northern Mali. We all remember how they came desecrating tombs and the Timbuktu library, which is one of the, I mean, I can say it's one of the, it is, if a civilization has a cradle, I think it is part of that cradle of civilization. Wherever one mentions the past in this world and then thinks about monuments, relics that can help convert the feelings of humanity on one, I mean, place to remember that life in the past and life in the present has a deep meaning. These monuments could be called landmarks. Therefore, if we see groups that are spreading or aiding and abetting those who are marauding fighters to engulf our society into sectarian violence, it should definitely be a cause of concern. So for that reason, the intervention of the French army in Mali could be justified in one way or the other, or maybe in two ways. The first is that there is a lot of wrong that has been done by the former colony France in Africa. Therefore, helping rebuild that image is a good start in this modern generation to separate our people in Africa and the people in France during this time from the people who lived in France during the colonization, the era of colonization, and those who lived in Africa during the era of colonization. So it's like I said earlier, it's a shared responsibility. So France itself has already taken bold steps and concrete steps. Of course, most of the time there are different views whenever a political decision is taken. For that very reason, we will also give room to criticism for those who may be skeptical about the intervention of France in these parts of the world. But for us here, the most immediate and the most important part of the whole thing is that at least there is a permanent member of the Security Council spearheading this operation of trying to help our vulnerable countries with armies that are not as strong as theirs to eject these marauding fighters and then neutralize them from being able to engulf our parts of society or parts of the continent into sectarian violence or any other form of violence, which is indeed a step in the right direction as far as security and economic issues are concerned, because the two go side by side. You can never have a strong economy in a society where there is no security, and you can never have stability, peace, progress where there is no security. However, the challenge that lies ahead of us now is the interpretation of security within certain pariah states in Africa and the interpretation of security for those who are expected to step in and stop some of these atrocities. Therefore, when we think about a challenge like illegal immigration, we would all agree that the best way to discourage illegal immigration in Africa, to be more precise in West Africa, is by promoting democracy. And then when democracy is to, if democracy is to be promoted, I think, or I certainly believe that it cannot be done in the absence of poverty alleviation. It cannot be done in the absence of access to resources. It also cannot be done in the absence of the true meaning of constitutions. After all these things are achieved, we can also think about building strong economies. And I think that in one way or the other is something that even those marauding fighters would agree with. Of course, they will agree with it in a different way, because their own way of analyzing it would be, yes, if we are to elect people, we are the ones who should be elected, because we are the ones who control this side of the country, or we are the ones who have the upper hand, because but the upper hand they have is because they have arms. Being armed and dictating a country or a section of society is not the same as being, productive. Therefore, there is a difference between popularity and production. Some people are popular for the wrong reason, and some are popular for a good reason. However, if the two are might, I believe what we expect to come out of it is nothing less than being productive. Now, the other side of it is that in Africa itself, the challenge of things like illegal immigration is caused by internal factors. Like the Ghanaian writer said, no one would point at his father's hut with the left hand. It is a bad omen in African culture or tradition. So I tend to believe that if people have good governance, access to resources, poverty alleviation, capacity building, all found on a platform called constitution in the true meaning of the word, I don't think anybody would venture the high seas between Tripoli and the islands of Italy, where death is more than likely when one thinks about what lies ahead in that rough sea. So one of those, these are the challenges facing Africa internally. Therefore, the best way to fight security issues in Africa should start from the states, because it is the people of Africa who are victimized by states, most of the time pariah states, corrupt states, dictatorial states. And this is how also sectarian violence finds it easy to breed its evil seeds, or to sow its evil seeds. Because the moment you have dictatorship in place, the moment you have a leadership that believes that the best way to force people or to make them succumb to what they wouldn't even want to accept is by having arms in your hands, that is not giving a good precedence to others, because definitely the bad precedence is that these marauding fighters also would say that the moment you are fully armed, you can impose your will on people. And then, by imposing a single person's will on people, or by imposing, the will of few on the masses, is definitely not going to be the best way to stabilize a country, a region, or a continent. Which brings us back within Africa, by using these things that we have just mentioned during the program or analyzed, to justify the fact that there is no way that all these missions, peacekeeping missions and anything, would succeed if we do not encourage democracy or nourish it inside Africa. Of course, using the French army to uproot these challenges, like the northern Mali fighters and then those in Central Africa, in collaboration with the African Union or the forces of different member states, like the armed men and women. You see, even if those areas are, the illicit flow of small arms is curbed, and then things are brought under control, we would still think about what caused it. Because look at the trend of sectarian violence in Africa. Which countries has it affected so far? Let us just do a synopsis of case studies here, because let's go back to Mali. During post-colonial era, Mali was one of those countries controlled by a dictator, a very ruthless dictator in the name of Moussa Traoré. What brought Moussa Traoré down is because his will was being imposed on the will of the masses, and then the army itself turned against him, and he was overthrown by a very loyal and disciplined commando in the name of Amadou Toumani Touré. Moussa Traoré left, Alpha Omar Konaré came in, and then a new page was opened in Mali and democracy came forward. After Omar Konaré left, Amadou continued building the institutions of democracy in Mali. But for whatever reason, there came in these marauding fighters in the northern side of Mali. But what facilitated it? It was whirling accusations, sometimes accusations, counter accusations. Some of it came with concrete facts that corruption was entrenched. Therefore, it must be democracy that is meant to promote the meaning of the word, that is meant to promote everything about what is expected from a democratic government. We cannot think, or we Africans shouldn't only believe that the moment somebody is elected and then in the office he is democratic. Democracy is incomplete without access to resources. Democracy is incomplete where those elected believe that they are not answerable to the constitution or they are above the law. So you see, it was a good breeding ground for difference, and also it makes it possible for borders to be porous. It makes it possible for the psyche of a society to be so gullible. Therefore, it makes it possible for such groups to come in and entrench themselves and become a nuisance. At the end of the day, loud mouths like the former head of the junta, Sanogo, overthrew Amadou, thinking that militarily that could be a solution. Of course, it is not a solution, because people's power is the solution. Sanogo, after all, has been taken out by who? By the people, and today he is facing the dark side of history and being blamed. So actually, even though some people believe that during Arteta's time there was corruption and rampant corruption, we would say that indeed the existence of everything related to these kind of things is everything related to this kind of thing is as obvious as one can say or see. Now we proceed to places like Central African Republic. We all remember the history of Jean Bedel Bokassa, one of the most ridiculous and also ruthless dictators on the continent of Africa. You see, the legacies of ruthless dictators leave a scar behind, and most of the time when they leave a country, if there is no other means of making sure that the people are brought together, it becomes chaotic. And then at the end of the day, such countries are the best breeding grounds for factions like the ones we have in Central Africa. Today we have seen this country torn into pieces, sectarian violence engulfing it. That is the most dangerous, because Central African Republic is like is the navel, or one can say is part of those countries that are the navel of Africa, if Africa is a belly. So you can see how it has been turned into a country where different warring factions are tearing each other into pieces. The legacy of a dictator always breeds things like that. Do we need France to intervene there? Of course, yes. Do we want it to be done in collaboration with the African Union? Of course, yes. Do we want it to be done for the short term? No, we want it to be done for the long term. Now from there, one can think about places like the Democratic Republic of Congo. The violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo starts from when? Of course, it has been there, but it was unilateral. It was internal conflicts, because we all remember the legacy of King Leopold of Belgium, chopping the wrists of Africans simply because some of them are tired whilst walking in the rubber plantation. From there, post-colonial Africa brought us what? It brought us images like Shombe and images like Mobutu Sese Seko. Those were the days that a dear son called Patrice Emery Lumumba stood against what he saw today. But I think he lived a life that was 100 years away from the actual Congo during his time. Now we have seen what is happening in Congo. Now we have seen how Congo has been torn into pieces. A basin that could have been the place where most parts of Africa could get their ration. You see, the inheritance of dictatorial regimes is usually like that. You can see it will take Congo a long time before it could settle down and be one of the most democratic countries in Africa. That also is what is left by the legacy of a ruthless dictator. You can see the challenges that are faced by Liberia today. Successively there were how many dictators? Of course, there was Samuel Kenyon Doe and Charles Taylor. So you see, from there you can see the fierce battles that used to take place in Sierra Leone. From the time of Papa Saki, then Joseph Momo, from Joseph Momo to Valentine Strasser, from Valentine Strasser, few months of Mother Bio. From there you had border people like Said Musa and all these. You see, between the end of the military rule to when Tijan Kaba came, you can see why I'm justifying the fact that the best answer is democracy. You can see it was when we had the long sleeve and short sleeve, sad and bloody story of rebels coming, cutting people's hands, asking them if you want us to cut it short or long. You can see how many people have been amputated in Sierra Leone. That was the legacy of dictatorship. What has helped Sierra Leone forget about it for now and then concentrate on the right path? Democracy. So there is where the difference is. So in as much as we want intervention in these parts of Africa, we would also want it to be done for the long term, and then as and when these armies are coming in and helping us stabilize these areas, the best way is during the stabilization process is that to encourage parties that are democratically minded to come forward and build democracies. That's the best answer for Africa, to be a single platform within a decade or two, and then we start thinking about United States of Africa. It's very easy where it is made easy, but it's extremely difficult where it is made difficult. And then let's go to another point. You see, between the time of those military rulers who took power from Nkrumah, then to the 19-year rule of John Jerry Rawlings, you could see how Ghana was. What brought us the solution? The fact that he stepped down, and then John Kufuor came in and then stepped down. Atta Mills, the late one, may his soul rest in peace. You see, this is what has helped Ghana. You can imagine between the time that Rawlings came to accept and understand the power of the people and democracy to now how fast Ghana has been running. That shows the answer is democracy. Of course, democracy in the true meaning of the word, where constitution is the foundation, where capacity building is there, where access to resources are assured, and this cannot happen in the absence of the true meaning of a constitution and everybody knowing and understanding that nobody is above the law, poverty alleviation, and of course, like I said, access to resources. And how can you achieve this without transparency and accountability? Those are not words to be sung, these are not songs for us to listen to and then enjoy the tune. These are not songs, these are facts. We have to be accountable to what we do and what we say in the name of states and in the name of people. without which we can never have the true meaning of democracy in Africa. And then you can see today Libya. That is where we may conclude the program. I mean, Libya's case is one of the saddest. You can see the legacy. As recent as 72 hours ago, we have seen the warring factions in Libya saying that they want to introduce Sharia law. That in itself is sectarian violence in the right sense of the word. What do we have in Libya? We have groups that are manned by Libyans, as far as our investigations are concerned, and Ghanaians. These groups, what do? Youngsters from West Africa, who are of course running away from hardship caused by corrupt and dictatorial states like that of the Gambia. The case of a Gambian was brought to our attention. The Gambian traveled via Niger. From Niger, they went into Libya. And then there are groups in Libya itself which are manned by Libyans and Ghanaians. Ghanaians, I'm saying, not Nigerians, Ghanaians. What do? They will ask you to pay them $700 for transportation fees and security within a country that has been torn into pieces. That country was managed by who, or headed by who? A former dictator, Muammar Gaddafi. Then when they drive you, they take you to a city called Sabah or something, and then you stay there for a while. Between that city, or if I make a mistake in the name, but between that city, excuse me for that, but between that city and Tripoli, the normal fee is 10 dinar. But nowadays, those groups that help people be smuggled through checkpoints and other places ask you to pay them 600 dinar per person. The affected ones are the illegal immigrants who run away from countries like the Gambia. We are not going to mention the name of the Gambian for now, but we've just got the report. Of course, not from Africa, we got it from foreign intelligence. So you see, this is existing. And why would a youngster from the Gambia who is between the age of 19 and 22, 25 prefer traversing the desert from Niger to Libya and be paying from one point to another, sometimes which is about 100 kilometers each time, $700, and then some of these kids do not take permission from their parents. They travel, and then whenever they reach, they know that the love of a parent and a mother, especially some of them who have parents abroad, would call and say, if you don't pay this money at this point of time, we are going to shot and be buried. And that's not a joke. There are two ways to pay the fare. They will give you time, 2 weeks or 1 week, if you don't get the Western Union wired. And it's a very dangerous network of human trafficking, and their offices are in Ghana, Niger, and in areas like Benin. Usually people think about the usual suspect, Nigeria. This is not Nigeria. This is Ghanaians who do it. It's a synchronized network of human traffickers who are the ones who will help, of course in quotes, it's not help, transport these youngsters who are running away from home, and then they take you. At the moment, there are no boats crossing between Tripoli and Italy, because the sea, as they call it there, the sea has been closed because it's winter time. They don't want to take the risk. At the moment, so many Gambian youngsters are packed in a large place in Tripoli, waiting for the winter to end. Then they will start venturing the dangerous route between Tripoli and those islands in Italy. This is the most serious security concern when one even thinks about the sectarian violence, because these are the very people who become desperate and they reach places like Libya. They may be forced into even joining groups that the people will think that they are in in Europe somewhere, and then they are turned into mercenaries and paid some money to go back and fight. So the best answer for me, I believe, or for any other person is, in Africa we must be ready to nourish democracy in the true meaning of the word. And to begin with, everything should begin with law, law and order, constitution. And then we need to be made to understand that law is not meant for decoration. Law is meant to be the food of tranquility, peace, stability and progress. Otherwise, law has no meaning. So that is where we stand. And then this is a thought-provoking program, which is a cause for concern, of course, for Africa. And then we applaud France for joining forces with the African Union to make sure that such marauding fighters are eradicated in areas like Central Africa. But we want to remind France that that is an outcome of something that was being fermented for years. The same happens or is taking place in northern Nigeria. Now let them reflect on the southern part of Casamance and make sure that the interested parties that are foiling that war are also brought to book. And then the permanent members of the Security Council, like France and the United States and China and others, need to be very careful also to understand that dealing with some of these states directly sometimes will derail the process. They must be ready to speak truth to pariah states and help the people, sponsor institutions like political parties, civil society groups to remove these pariah states. Otherwise, the interventions in Africa will just be meaningless, and we don't want it to be meaningless. We want it to be helpful and to maintain the momentum, not only for now, but let it be in long term, so that we will never go back to what was here before. We want an Africa that is free from domination, free from exploitation, free from dictatorship, and then we want people's voices to be democracy. Thank you.